All right, just a short time ago, President Biden commemorated the 58th anniversary of Bloody Sunday by walking across the Edmund Pettus Bridge in Selma, Alabama, where back in 1965, state troopers clubbed, tear gassed, and sicked dogs upon peaceful protesters marching against anti-black demonstration. It was a solemn visit, but a crucial one, especially given Biden's vocal commitment to black voters, who played a large role in getting him to the White House in 2020. Now, juxtapose that moment with how congressional Republicans exercised their power just this week, and you really have a perfect distillation of current American politics. Consider in particular how the House Oversight Committee is gearing up for what critics are calling Benghazi 2.0, a rash of investigations into far-right fever dreams that are designed to attack the president and serve nothing more than the red meat and the GOP base. Don't get me wrong, not exactly shocked by all of this, but I am disappointed because Kevin McCarthy didn't tap far-right firebrands like Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz to chair the Oversight Committee. No, he didn't pick those guys. He handpicked Kentucky Congressman James Comer. This is a guy, a purported bipartisan backslapper, a so-called adult in the room. Those were the phrases that the media used to describe Representative Comer. And since he is not as loud or perhaps as brash as Jordan or Gaetz, he's often been flying under the radar since he took over the chairmanship. But we've been keeping an eye on James Comer, and we need to dispel this notion of who he is. He is just as radical, just as far-right, just as conspiracy-driven as the other louder House Republican figures. And just this week, Comer decried the fact that he'd missed his chance to see President Biden's son, Beau, a U.S. veteran who died of brain cancer, be prosecuted and thrown in prison. Despicable sentiments from an alleged adult in the room. Last month, Comer baselessly suggested that the Chinese surveillance balloon was carrying a, quote, Wuhan bioweapon. He said he was going to threaten TV service provider DirecTV with an authoritarian ultimatum if they didn't add back his favorite propaganda outlet, Newsmax, to their lineup. And he has repeatedly called for not just the FBI, not just the Justice Department, but for border security coffers to be defunded and dismantled. Forget about a wolf. James Comer is a grenade launcher. He is such in sheep's clothing. Let's be clear about that. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Greg Casar of Texas. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And I want to get your general thoughts on this new chairman of the House Oversight Committee, because as we just outlined there, he's somebody who's kind of been flying below the radar. He's not as bombastic, perhaps, in front of the cameras as a Jim Jordan or Matt Gaetz. But what's your take?
So first of all, thanks so much for having me on, and I hope you don't grill me as hard as you just grilled Mehdi here about DC Comics a moment ago. But what is so tragic to me is the Committee on House Oversight used to be chaired in the past by legendary chairmen who could be nonpartisan, but ultimately held fraudsters and grifters and enemies of democracy to account. People like Jack Brooks from Texas, who helped drive down the cost of government services when corporate monopolies were gobbling up all the government contracts, held folks like Richard Nixon accountable for Watergate. We used to be able to have a committee that stood up for the little guy instead of stepped on the little guy, that uncovered the truth instead of obscured the truth. But what we have been seeing in committee has really been a smokescreen of right-wing conspiracy theories that only serves the larger corporate interests that are behind the modern-day GOP. I'll give just one example. Chairman Comer recently opened up an investigation into the horrific derailment of the train in East Palestine, which we should investigate that. But his investigation only included the administration. They should be included in those questions. But when we asked that Norfolk Southern also be investigated, the company that ultimately is responsible, that they be investigated, we hear crickets. And I think that's what's emblematic of this right-wing fear-mongering as a smokescreen, ultimately for the corporate interests that the modern-day GOP serves.
Let me get your reaction to something Comer said, Chairman Comer, specifically his vile remarks about Beau Biden. Do you fear that the committee will become just one big political hit job on President Biden ahead of the 2024 elections? I mean, this is the same playbook of the Benghazi committee when it was Kevin McCarthy running the show.
We're already seeing that every single week in the Oversight Committee. And what's tragic about it is there are American people suffering right now. There's real issues that we see all across the country. In Texas, people's reproductive rights being taken away, workers' rights being taken away, folks not sure if their kids are going to be safe in school from gunmen. And instead, what we have is powerful committee that is supposed to be able to hold the government accountable, hold big corporations accountable, being weaponized about a political campaign, the presidential race. It's like when in Texas, 53 people were found dead, immigrants coming to this country trying to find a better life, women, kids as young as 13 years old, scorched to death in the back of a tractor trailer because they were hiding to try to come to this country for safe haven. And Greg Abbott, our governor, his public statement was not sadness or remorse or wishing health for the few people that survived. No, it was, these deaths are on Biden. And that's what we're continuing to see with Chairman Comer, trying to find any issue that he can point at President Biden about instead of turning our view towards the American people and how it is that we can serve them. And it's really a disgrace.
Talk to me about how Democrats are planning or can push back on the agenda of the Oversight Committee under the Republican leadership.
We can't fall into the trap of just trying to be the defense counsel for the administration. Instead, we have to be the defense counsel for the truth, because I think we have to get the majority of the American people to believe that these committee hearings aren't just a partisan game, but that there's actually elected officials that are looking out for them. And so, for example, when we had that committee hearing on immigration, and there were so many of the folks on Jim Comer's side of the aisle talking about saying that undocumented immigrants were the folks bringing fentanyl into the country and other invasion conspiracy theories, all entirely not based on truth or based on reality. It's really important for us to fight back with the truth, to talk about how we need to address what's happening in our country with overdose deaths, talk about the public health crisis in our country, come up with real solutions on helping asylum seekers be able to be a part of this country and to stabilize countries abroad. I think we need to put out a truly positive agenda so that voters have a real choice between right-wing conspiracy theories that serve corporate masters or people who believe that our real masters are the American people.
Let me ask you about your colleagues in the Republican Party in your home state of Texas. You talked about that briefly a moment ago. They moved to formally censure one of your fellow Texas Republican Congressman, Tony Gonzalez, over his votes supporting gun control legislation and same-sex marriage. Your reaction to what is happening in your home state with this Republican Party?
Texas, when I think of Texas, I don't think of Greg Abbott. I don't think of the right-wing extremists that are against things like same-sex marriage or gun safety. I think of folks like Sarah Weddington, the 20-something-year-old lawyer who won Roe v. Wade and brought abortion rights to this country. That was not so long ago. That was a case won in Texas. I think of the Voting Rights Act, which President Biden just went and celebrated as he crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge today. That was signed into law by a Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson. Certainly not a perfect president, but somebody who signed not just the Voting Rights Act, but also the Civil Rights Act, also the Fair Housing Act, who also brought us Medicaid and Head Start. My state is a state where the majority of people believe in something much different than the current existing ruling regime. And I believe that what we need to be able to do is to organize that majority back to our progressive roots.
Congressman Greg Casar, thank you so much for your time, sir. Greatly appreciate your insights. And I hope I didn't go as hard as I did on Mehdi with you.
No problem. I won't bring up any comic book wars, but happy to come back anytime.
You got it, sir. Thank you so much.
Yeah, now I know how tough it can get. Thank you so much.